Hello and welcome back to our Knit No Shades of Grey make along with me, Katie Jones, and Hobby. We're now on our penultimate step, so we're so close to having our final piece. And in this step, we're going to work our really beautiful finishings on the body of our cardigan. In this next step, I'm going to be showing you how to add our rib that goes along all of our bottom edge, and then also how to add our attached I-cord binding, which covers the edge of our cardigan just so nicely. So come with me and I'll take you a closer look at all our finishing. So for our edging, we're going to start off with our rib trim along the whole of our bottom edge. And this is worked by doing a 1x1 rib. So that's by working one knit stitch, and then we're going to also introduce and show you how to do the purl stitch. So working one knit, one purl, one knit, one purl. And this works by picking up our stitches along the edge and then knitting in this direction from our body. Our next step of our trim is we're going to add this really nice attached I-cord binding along the front opening, which works covering the edge of our opening and giving a little bit more firmness to the edge of our cardigan. This is where we're going to also be using our double pointed needles, and you want to start off by using your circular needle and a crochet hook to help pick up your stitches along the edge. So we're going to start off with doing our bottom rib trim. So let's kick off first by adding our bottom rib. We're going to want a crochet hook to help pick up your stitches and your circular longer needles. So we're now going to work picking our stitches up along our bottom edge. You're going to be working across the whole of the bottom of your cardigan, and I'm going to demonstrate the rib just across this one joined block. Now you can follow along with the pattern, which gives us a guide for how many stitches we want to pick up per block. So I'm showing you on an example size 3. So I want to pick up 24 stitches roughly along the edge of each smaller block. If you're working on a size 2, you want to pick up roughly 20, and if you're working on a size 1, you want to roughly pick up 16. You don't have to pick up the exact amount, but this is a rough guide to keep your edge nice and straight without splaying out or ruching in. So I'm going to start and I'm going to pick up my stitches using a crochet hook. You can use your needle straight away if you prefer, but I find using a crochet hook really helpful. And I'm going to put my slip knot, ready, come into that first corner and place my knot on my hook and pull through. So I'm now roughly picking up 24 stitches along my edge, and these are evenly spaced, so they go quite close together but evenly spaced along your edge, and you can just use that total count to help you roughly get the right amount of stitches. Make sure that you're grabbing both of those strands of yarn as we come across. And you want to make sure when you're picking up your stitches that you're getting sort of 2 strands of the stitch. If you just pick up in the first strand, you'll find that it will pull the stitch quite big. So make sure you're getting sort of 2 strands in of the stitch when you're picking up. Just working your way across. And I'm going to be working across one block at a time. So I'm going to count my stitches: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. One more to get 24. And now I'm ready to pass these over onto my needle. So this time we're making sure we're working with our circular needles because we're working a much longer row. And I'm going to slip them across. And because we're picking up more stitches and we don't want our stitches to twist when we're making our rib, we're going to slip them across slightly differently. So we're going to make sure that we come from the back. I'm going to get our first stitch, come from the back through to the front and pull them across. So we're coming from the back, slip and pull them across. So I'll go through that. So our stitches are on our hook and we're coming with our needle and we're coming from the back through and slip them across. So we're coming across that stitch, so over the other side, through the front and slipping them across. And this just means our stitches will be in the right direction when we come to knit them off our needle. So we come through the back and slip them across. And so we've transferred and picked up those stitches for our first block. I'm now going to work across the top of my diagonal block edge. And one thing to remember with your diagonal block is it's got far more stretch than your corner block because of the direction we've knitted. So it's really easy, if you're not following the stitch count, to overstretch this block and for it to splay out. So that's why the stitch count is there to help you to keep the block nice and straight and in line. So for my size, I'm now going to pick up 24 stitches across this edge until I get to the middle. And you just want to evenly space them. So I'm just going to count across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. And then again, just remembering when we're slipping off from our crochet hook to our needle this time, that we're coming from this side of our stitch from the back through and pulling across. So coming from the back through the stitch, pulling across. So make sure that you're coming over the stitch, through the back and pulling across. And this just twists your stitch in the right direction for us to knit them in our first rib row. So you can see we've started to build up our stitches on our needle. I'm now going to continue across the rest of my block, and you'll want to work along the whole bottom edge of your cardigan until you've picked up all your stitches. So now we've worked on building up all our stitches, so picking them all up and placing them on our circular needle, we're ready to start our rib. So we're going to take our work and we're going to get ready to do our rib. So the rib we're working is 1 knit stitch, 1 purl stitch. So I'm going to do my first knit. And you can see, because we've twisted when we've slipped our stitches this time, our stitches are in the right position. So we're ready to just go into our stitch to do our first knit. And now we're going to work on a purl. So this is the first time we've done a purl stitch in this pattern. And the one thing that's really important to remember when making a rib and switching between knit and purl is to bring our working yarn to the right side of the work. So this means we have to bring it between our needles to the front when we're starting our purl. So when we're doing our purl stitches, we always want the yarn at the front of our work. And to do a purl stitch, we're now going to come into the stitch through the front. So we're coming through the middle of the stitch to the front, and we're going to wrap around our needle, hold and pull back and slip off. We're then going to work a knit stitch. So I'm taking my working yarn and putting it in the right place to knit. So that comes between my needles to the back. Then I'm ready to knit my next stitch. And then I'm going to come with my yarn, bring it through my needles to the front, ready for my next purl. So my purl stitch, I'm coming in, crossing at the front, wrapping round my needle, holding, pushing back and slipping off. So then I'm going to work my knit stitch. So I'm taking my working yarn, I'm bringing it between my needles, so my yarn's at the back, ready to knit. So knitting my next stitch, and then I'm back to a purl. So taking my yarn, bringing through the needles to the front, so it's in the right position to purl, coming through my stitch, crossing at the front, wrapping around my needle, pushing back and pulling off. And taking my yarn back, coming into knit. And then I've got my purl, so I'm coming between my needles to the front, and then coming up through my stitch, wrapping round and pushing back. Now you do get into a bit of a rhythm with doing your 1x1 rib, but it's just remembering to bring that yarn backwards and forwards when you're doing your different stitches. If you forget to bring your working yarn into the right position, so I've just done a knit stitch, if I then forgot to bring it to the right place and went to do a purl, you can see I get an extra wrap on my needle, and so you accidentally create stitches. So this is why it's really important to remember to bring your yarn to the correct working position. So if I'm purling, I want my yarn on the front, in front to do my purl. And if I'm knitting, I want my working yarn at the back to do my knit stitch. And so you want to do one purl, one knit, one purl, all the way along until you've knitted your first row of your 1x1 rib. So you can just repeat that action all the way across until you've knitted your entire row of stitches. So now I've worked my way across, knitting my first row of rib. I'm now turning my work and I'm back on the front, and I'm going to be knitting my next row. So I finished with my last stitch working a purl on this side. So my last stitch was a purl. So when I turn, my first stitch is going to be a knit. If you end on a knit stitch, you want to make sure that then you start on a purl. So you're going to work the opposite stitch that you ended in. And so, like I said, I ended in a purl. So I'm going to start with a knit. So I'm doing my knit stitch, and then I'm bringing my yarn through to the front to do my purl stitch. And then I'm taking my yarn to the back to do my knit stitch and bringing my yarn through to the front to do my purl. And I'm bringing my yarn to the back to do my knit stitch and I'm bringing my yarn to the front to do my purl. If you're trying to look at your stitches to double check which stitch you're doing, you can see here, even though we've just started, you can still see the difference. So our knit stitch would be next, and it comes the loop and straight up, and you can see where our purl stitch is the one after it has the sort of dash across. So you know you want to knit when we've just got the loop, and we want to do a purl when it feels like there's a dash across so we can see the back part of the stitch. And we're going to follow that pattern, working your way across, alternating your stitches. So doing one knit, one purl, one knit, one purl. Growing our rib. So I'm going to work all the way across, completing my row. And then you're going to carry on and continue that pattern until you have the amount of rows asked for in the pattern for this section. So I'm now working along my last row. So you want to work 12 rows of rib. And we can count that. So we count from the bottom up. This first loop, that's our pickup row. So we don't count that. So we can count on from that. And you can count each little loop as a row if you're trying to work out how many you've done so far. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And now I'm working across for my 12th row, and we're going to be casting off on the wrong side of our work. Now we've come to the end of our last rib row, and you can see with my rib here that our rib is really a decorative rib. It doesn't ruche our work in very much, so it shouldn't feel too tight. And you can really start to see the 1 by 1 rib pattern. We're now going to cast off our rib. And we're casting off on the wrong side of the work. So this is the inside of our cardigan. I'm casting off my rib stitch in my rib pattern. So I'm starting with a knit stitch. So I'm going to knit my first stitch, and then I'm going to bring my yarn forward to purl my next stitch. And then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to pick up my first stitch and pull it over my second stitch. And then bringing my yarn round to do a knit stitch. And then I'm taking my needle and picking up the first stitch and bringing it over the second stitch. And then I'm bringing my yarn through to work a purl. And then I'm taking that first stitch and bringing it over. So I'm just going to follow that pattern along my edge to cast off the whole of my rib. So just keep remembering to change for your knit and purl, and then take that first stitch and bring it over that second stitch. And remember, if you can't remember if you're on a knit or a purl, where you can see the sort of little loops, the V's of the stitch, you want to knit, and where you can see the sort of dashes, you want to purl. And remember, for knit, you want the yarn at the back of your work to do your knit stitch. And for purl, you want the yarn at the front of the work to work your purl stitch. And that's how we cast off our rib. And when you get to your end, you're going to just bring your last stitch over. We're going to pull that loop. Take our snips, we just need a small end. Cut. pull that tail through so you secure your cast off. And there you have your cast off edge. I'm now going to show you how we do our attached I-cord to bind the centre front. So now you've completed your rib, we're going to add our finishing touch, our attached I-cord along the front of your body. You're going to want to use your double pointed needles for this. So grab your needles and your yarn and I'll show you how to attach this. Once you've completed your bottom rib trim, we're now going to work on our attached I-cord along the edge. I'm showing you on this block, but you're going to be wanting to start on block 1. So making sure that you're starting on the right side, and we're going to work up and then around the whole front edge of your cardigan. This is where we also want our double pointed needles, because we're going to be using both sides to knit from. We're going to take our yarn and we're going to put this with a slip knot. And we want a little bit of a long tail to start with, because we're going to use this just to sew close the end afterwards. And I'm going to put this on my first needle. And we want to start by casting on 5 stitches. So if you're casting on with a long tail cast on, just remember to leave a little bit extra for your tail still, and I'm going to be cable casting on. So I'm going to come in. I'm going to do my first stitch, and then I'm coming between the stitches for my cable cast on. So between the stitches, bringing round and placing that on. Between the stitches, bringing round, placing that on my needle. And we want 5 in total. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So once we have your first 5 stitches, we're going to knit across. So we're just going to knit into each of those stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pull that tight. So we've got our first 5 stitches. And now here's where the fun starts. We're going to attach this to the edge of our cardigan to start our I-cord bind off. So we're going to take our bottom rib. And so we've got the tail, and make sure that you're using the long strand that's attached to the ball, not your tail. And we're starting in this bottom rib, and we're going to pick up 1 stitch at the start. So I'm coming in the first 1 stitch up the beginning of my side of my rib, and I'm going to come in and I'm picking up 1 stitch, and I'm just going to pick up using my needle as we're only picking up 1 stitch at a time. And how I like to do it is wrap around my needle and then pull through. So I've picked up 1. So I've got the 5 stitches on my needle that I cast on, and then 1 stitch I've picked up. Now we're going to use both ends of our double pointed needle, and this is why you need DP ends for this part. We're going to push across, and we're going to knit those stitches off the other end. So we're taking, make sure again you're using the long end attached to your ball. And we're coming in that first stitch, and we're going to knit across, and we're going to knit the first 4 stitches. So I'm taking my yarn and I'm pulling tight, and I'm going to knit my first 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, till I've got 2 stitches left on my needle. And with these 2 stitches, I'm going to knit them together through the back of loop. So I'm taking my needle, I'm coming through the back of both stitches. So you've gone through the back of 2, and then I'm going to knit those 2 together. reducing my stitches, and then I'm going to come along evenly the next row up and pick up one stitch off the edge of my cardigan. So I'm wrapping around my needle, pulling that through to pick up. So I'm ending again with 6 stitches across. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got 6, and then we're going to push that down our needle to the opposite end, and then we're going to repeat that. So I'm going to knit my next 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 2 stitches left on my needle. I'm going to knit them together through the back of loop, so through the back of both loops, knit 1, and then I'm ready to come along and pick up 1 stitch from the side of my rib. So I'm jumping up, I'm wrapping around, I'm pulling through to pick up a stitch, and then I'm pushing along to the other end of my needle and repeating that. So we're knitting 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, knitting 2 together through their back loop, and at this point I just like to give it a little pull as it's starting to get a bit bigger, and you can start to see our I-cord forming. So now I've got 5 stitches on my needle. I want to pick up that 6, so I'm going to jump up a row, wrap round my needle, pull that through to pick up a stitch, and I'm ready to pass that along to the other end, and give your yarn a bit of a pull. And so now I'm going to knit those 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, knit 2 together through the back of the loop, and just always remember, after you've knitted your 2 together, you want to come evenly spaced, jump up your rib, pick up 1 more stitch along your edge, so you've got your 6, and then pass your stitches down, and you're ready to knit your 4 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, knit 2 together through the back of their loop, give your cord a little bit of a tug to line it up, jump up, pick up your next stitch, so you've got 6, and you're ready to repeat that. You can start to see your I-cord binding take shape, and it just leaves a really nice edge along the front, but also a really nice clean edge along the back of your work. So you're going to keep picking up your stitches evenly across along the whole front of your edge. And so as you continue up the side of your cardigan, you just want to pick up your stitches evenly. So evenly space them. You don't want it to pull or stretch out your work too much. It's always good to remember that your diagonal blocks are extra stretchy, so make sure that you're not distorting your shape. So you just want to evenly pick up your stitches and carry on your I-cord along the whole outside front. The reason we've left this tail at the beginning and you'll leave a tail at the end when you're finishing is just so we can close up the bottom edge of our I-cord and we can make sure it doesn't stretch too much at the first stitch. So I'm now going to grab a needle and show you just how to finish off the bottom of your I-cord. So with a tapestry needle, you can just use your small end to then make sure that that first stitch, it's always quite easy to overstretch that first stitch you can see at the bottom. So I'm going to use my needle to grab that bottom part to pull it in and then turn around, and I'm just going to use this to catch the bottom edge and close up that part of my I-cord. So I'm going to sew through that bottom. Just catching both sides. To finish off and neaten up the edge of my I-cord bind off. So I can now just weave this in along that bottom edge. Remember to let it not distort your work. I'm going to come back. Along, pull through. And fasten off. And that's how we work our really nice attached I-cord to just really give a nice, clean, firm edge to the inside front opening of our cardigan. And there you have it, the two finishing aspects of your cardigan body. How exciting, we've only got one step left. I really hope you enjoy working on this next part of your make-along. Just remember to keep sharing your progress with us by using the hashtag #NoShadesOfGreyMal. You can also tag me, Katie Jones Knit, and Hobby in your pictures. And don't forget our Facebook group where you can follow along, sharing your progress, tips and tricks with other makers also making the mal. We've also got a special competition for 10 lucky winners for those who post a picture of their finished cardigan by April the 30th on Facebook or Instagram. Just make sure to tag the No Shades of Grey Mal, myself, Katie Jones Knit, and Hobby on your posts. So see you next week for our final part. Woo!